Good evening and welcome to Native North, Voices of Alaska. I'm Maude Blair. Tonight my guest is author and Renaissance man Serge Lecomte. Well, he's not an Alaska Native himself. He's just published a book of poetry from the point of view of an Alaskan Native. Now, Serge, before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I was born in Belgium, and my father's of French extraction. My mother's Ukrainian, and she spent 4 years in a prison camp in Germany, and when I was 12, we came to Philadelphia. A big culture shock from small village to city life. Then Brooklyn, New York, then I went into the military for 4 years. Then I went to grad school. Then I went back to the military as a Green Beret instructor of languages. And from there I came to Alaska, and I've been here close to 20 years. And I've done many things here. The last thing I did was work as a professor at the University of Alaska.
And that's actually where I met you years and years ago.
Right, right.
What are some of the other things you've done besides being a teacher?
Well, I was a medic on helicopter rescue. I worked as an orderly. I pulled pipe up north. Worked as a builder, build houses, log homes, regular houses. Worked in bars as a bartender, and did many other types of jobs, labor, hard labor, lifting rocks and logs and fishing and etc. Yeah.
How many books have you written now?
I've written 12 books, 2 in French and 10 in English, and 1 was written in Spanish but hasn't been published yet. I've been published in Spanish.
What inspired you to write this latest one, The Polar Bear Still Dances?
Well, it's been an ongoing process. It wasn't done overnight. I had been writing these little pieces about American natives. It's not just about Alaskan natives. I had met some Navajos. I was introduced to Navajos and Apaches when I was a kid. And I always wanted to know how they lived. So I checked out some books and we read them together. It says, that's not how we live. So it was the dichotomy that began for me. And then I read books on Iroquois. It was my first book, and how actually the American Constitution was based on Iroquois laws. So, but nobody ever mentioned that in history books either. So I just visited villages. Elam was one nice village I went to back in the 80s. Went to Shishmaref for a couple of weeks, visited a couple of friends there in '79. And what amazes me is that a lot of Alaskans, I mean so-called Alaskans, from Anchorage or Fairbanks, big cities, have never been to a small village or even met Native people. They see them on TV, and the only natives they see is Second Avenue people. I said, wow, look at those natives, It's the only natives they meet. Or they never meet them, And in '95, I decided I was going to spend my time as a homeless person. So I hung around Second Avenue on the benches and I slept there. I had a pad with me, and people would tell me stories. I had this lady that came up to me, get a cup of coffee. I said, yeah, sure, we'll go buy a cup of coffee. So I bought her a cup of coffee, and we sat there. She says, I walked all the way from Barrow this morning. I go, wow, man, that's a long way. So she actually, in her mind, she had traveled. She was looking for her sister who was in the hospital, and she hadn't found her yet. So it's like, remind me of Australian walkabouts, You walk in your mind, and there she was. She had a cup of coffee, she disappeared like that, and she wasn't there. I don't know. Maybe it was a mystical vision. I don't know. So I really identified with the people I met, and they told me nice stories and about their lives, and a lot of the Native people I know are alcoholics, and I met them in AA. I'm a recovering alcoholic myself. There's a lot of that going on, but there's other types of people, people who have achieved a certain standing in society, so it's just, they have the same problems that other people have, You can't just say that certain people are this way or that way. They're all different. And my Mescalero friend, there's one Apache in town, by the way, And he visits me all the time, and he says, you know, I tell the kids I visit in New Mexico, he says, you know, you can't fight another war, you know, the way they used to. The only way you can fight now is by getting an education, you know. That's the way to fight. Get an education. Get smart, you know. And how do we get on to this subject? Anyway, yeah, I've had a lot of contact with Native peoples. It's not just like reading anthropology books, you know. Although I've read quite a few books. And you gave me a few books a few years back. I read all of those. And my first book was actually about Eskimos in Greenland. About this, I forget the title. But this white guy had married this lady. And this Eskimo Greenlander. And he's just traveling one day, and he forgot his wife at home. He says, "You didn't take your wife, you know." He says, "You can have mine, you know, because they work together. So you could borrow my wife for a day." Yeah, that was kind of nice. Kind of wonder what the rest of society doesn't go that way.
Playing devil's advocate
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
What makes you qualified as a white man to write Native stories?
They're poems. As a human being myself, I've always felt outside. So I always see from a different perspective. Like my mother's book, Mother Speaks, is from my mother's perspective. I never went to Vietnam, and I wrote the Vietnam book that's being used as a textbook in California. Because I can divorce myself and look through different eyes. So it's fiction, actually. You enter in somebody else's skin for a little while, you know? So you hang around and you absorb and you become those person. I was gonna write the next book about gypsies. And my ex-wife said, "Man, do you have to act like these people? My God, you know, do you have to talk like these people?" It's almost like acting. And I was reading a book about Anthony Quinn when he was doing Zorba the Greek. And he had to go see a psychiatrist to separate himself from Zorba because he'd done that for like 15 years on Broadway. And he couldn't tell who he was anymore. It's called the original sin. So you separate yourself. But if you're a good writer, then you can enmesh yourself into somebody else. And as a matter of fact, my ex-girlfriend said, "You can't write like a woman." So I had written a book called The First Sex, not The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, but The First Sex. And I submitted like 30 of them to feminist magazines with a female name. And 20 of them got accepted. And she looked at me and says, "God, you know, I didn't think you could write like a woman because I know you as a man." But the other women didn't know that. You know, she said, "This is the most wonderful thing we've ever read." You know, so, you know, it's a matter of perspective. That's all.
As a matter of fact, the Native American population in the country has kind of taken you in too, because you have one of your
textbook.
poems from the Polar Bear Still Dances was published in this book here.
Right, this made me feel good because now I'm in a textbook, see? And if you looked at it, you know, there's like everybody's from a different tribe except me. I guess I'm from the Serge tribe. There's only one. That's it. Actually, I belong to the Bear Clan. My whole house is decorated with bears, pictures of bears, paintings of bears, carvings of bears. That's the dreamer, you know. That's why it should have been, you know, instead of the polar bear still dances, should have been the polar bear still dreams, because he is the dreamer in, I don't know about Eskimo mythology, but in the Native American Indian mythology, he is the dreamer, and the snake is sexual. He's, you know, he's not that, you know, the evil guy, you know. There's no such thing as an evil animal in mythology, in Native American mythology, you know. You have monsters, but the animals are not. The animals are all, you know, they have equal values, you know. Nobody's better, or they're just different. They perform differently, yeah.
And the poem that was published in that was Muktuk?
Muktuk. That came about in 1979. I was talking to this principal, and he had just tested a bunch of kids with a test from New York, and to identify giraffes, you know, these type of animals. Well, back then, they still didn't have TV in Elam or Savunga. They didn't have TV back then. They didn't have a library. As a matter of fact, a small library they had from borrowed books. And this guy was pointing to these animals, you know, zebras and things like that, and they didn't know what they were talking about. If he had put seals or whales and things like that, ravens, the kids would have gotten the test right. But instead, he tested them with animals that they'd never seen. And they weren't told what they were, you know. So that muktak came about from that. You know, I felt like the kid. I said, well, what are you saying? What are you asking? Why are you asking a dumb question when you don't even know the answer? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that SAT question.
Right.
That was in the papers all those years ago.
Which
one of these is can you not eat or can you eat?
Right.
And there was a list with seal in it.
Yeah.
And of course,
But you
people
can
from
eat it,
Alaska
right?
say, well, of course you can eat seal.
It's a matter of education. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you read that poem to us?
That one?
Yeah, I like that one.
Oh, she likes that one. I have to find it's probably the last one. Okay. It's called Muktak. I hope everybody knows what Muktak is. Do you know what Muktak is?
Of course I do.
Okay. But some people don't. They came to test the teachers from New York, the village children, to prod their minds with elephant and rhinoceros. A mouthful for anybody. What do we need with that when we have eaten seals and muktak from the whale? The children asked. It is important to know the world around us, the teachers from New York replied. We know the walrus hide upon our feet, but have you eaten of that rhino, whatever you call it? The children asked. You can't eat rhinoceros meat, the teachers answered in amazement. So you do not know the world if you have not tasted it, the children replied. The teachers from New York, they didn't stay to taste the muktak either. Anyway, that's muktak.
It's kind of bittersweet. I think that's why I like it.
You like that?
Yeah. I like that
But you don't like muktak yourself, Dave?
one.
No. It's like, I guess that, what is that? Norwegian fish that they eat.
I have no idea.
They put lye on it.
It doesn't sound very appetizing.
No, but it's tradition, you know?
Oh, but let's move on.
Yeah.
Have you had the same kind of reception from different cultures?
I grew up black. You mean, have I lived with other peoples?
No, I mean, the Native American culture
Yeah.
kind of accepted you. I mean,
Right.
they printed your poem in
Right.
a Native American
Right.
work. We were talking another time about how the Hispanic population isn't that receptive.
They're receptive in a personal way. But in terms of, what? In terms of publication, I have to change my name. Yeah. Because they don't really accept, you're not as accepted in that society. It's a very closed society. The Spanish people only accept those within their immediate family or their friends. And that's it. And in terms of getting anything published, I mean, you have to know somebody to get published. But I've had a few poems published under Sergio, where I take on the name of Alicia Maravilla, which is a feminine name that I use as a pseudonym, just to get through. If I write about a Hispanic woman, I have to use a feminine name. Isn't that weird?
Okay, really quickly, the book is The Polar Bear Still Dances.
Right.
It's available where?
At UAF Bookstore and at the Red Sled. Time for Christmas, folks.
Okay, that's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for being here, Serge.
Hey, thanks, Maud.
And if you have any questions or comments about the show, please give me a call here at Channel 11. I'm Maud Blair. Good night.